Hi boys and ghouls, so I'm finally back, but if you couldn't tell by today's title, I'm going to be doing a video all about my favorite podcasts. Now, I don't really listen to a whole lot of podcasts, honestly, so go ahead and leave your suggestions for me, or even just some of your favorite podcasts down below so I can listen to them. But yeah, so let's get right into the video. So basically, I listen to podcasts in the morning when I'm driving to go work out, and then I listen to them on the way back home from after my workout. Sometimes I'll listen to them on the way home from work. It just kind of depends. But let's just jump right into it. I have I think 5 that stand out to me the most. So let's just go ahead and get started. And these are in no particular order, just so you guys know. It's just kind of random. So the first one I'm going to be talking to you guys about is called Unlocking the Magic.
Know before you go on all the attractions that are listed, which is cool because it gives you a little overview, especially if you have young kids or you're trying.
This podcast is all about Disney World and Disneyland. I just kind of searched Disneyland one day on podcasts because I wanted to listen to stuff about Disneyland. And I found this one, and this one's really cool because they go over kind of a lot of stuff. I'll read you some of the episode titles. So One Thing to Eat, See and Ride in Disney's Magic Kingdom, One Thing to Eat, See and Ride in Disney's Hollywood Studios, Let's Test Your Disney Knowledge, Disney for the First Timers and How to Do It Right. So they just have a bunch of cool videos, either just talking about the park, talking about the rides, talking about the history. So if you're a Disney fanatic, or you're planning a trip to Disney World or Disneyland for the first time, or you're just planning a trip in general and you're getting excited, 10 out of 10 would recommend this one. So yeah, my favorite episode that I've listened to so far from them is the one about the trip for first timers. So I'm going for the 3rd time, 2nd time to Disneyland, but 3rd time overall going to the parks, in October. And so I'm just kind of trying to get little tricks and tips, because I'm not an expert. So, and it's just kind of exciting and fun to listen to, and they're super personable. So yes, Unlocking the Magic for sure. If you're into Disney or planning a Disney trip, check it out. So the second podcast I want to talk to you guys about is the Ricky Olson podcast. Now, I don't know if he's planning on continuing the podcast because the last episode he filmed was in October of last year. But basically, if you guys don't know who Ricky Olson is, he is the guitarist from Motionless in White, and I love and stand and support all of them and whatever they do. And so basically, when I found out that he was coming out with a podcast, I was like, yes, hell yeah. And he had no particular theme to his podcast. He just had guests on the show talking about whatever. My personal favorite episode was either with Vinny Moreno? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct, but that's the drummer from Motionless in White. Or I liked the Andy, oh God, I'm gonna butcher his last name. The Andy Skazko. I butchered that, so, but he is an illustrator of the books Nightmare Soup, and that one was really good. So if you're into Motionless in White, or you like Ricky Olson in general, I'd go listen to it. But again, unfortunately, I don't know if he's going to continue his podcast. Another one of my favorite podcasts of all time is called The Horror Show, and this is Bloody Disgusting's podcast.
But anyway, let's get back to this fucking movie because we are still not past the opening scene. So we meet James Marsden, his sister, they're here. James Marsden.
They're one of my all-time favorite horror platforms, if you will, and so obviously I'm going to listen to their podcast. And theirs is just kind of all random. They talk about movies, mostly movies, horror news, and so everything you need to know. So if you're a horror fanatic like myself, or you love Bloody Disgusting, which I'm assuming if you like Bloody Disgusting, you like horror, then you would love this podcast. And it's just kind of fun. I personally love listening to people talk about horror movies, especially if I've seen the horror movies. So, and I'm pretty sure they don't give spoilers. So that leads me to my next, and honestly one of my top favorite podcasts out of this whole list, and it's called The Boo Crew.
The Boo Crew Podcast.
We're not like any other family.
We're different because of where we grew up. Hill House.
Go ahead, scream. That's all we need.
Another victim crawls onto the gurney for a Boo Crew autopsy. Joining the...
And I'm pretty sure this is a newer podcast. Let me see. They don't have that many episodes. So it looks like their first episode was in February of last year, so it's fairly newer. But basically, they just kind of have guests on the show, just kind of talking about random stuff. They had Rob Zombie on the show. They had Ash Costello from New Year's Day on the show, if you guys like her. They've had Vanessa Decker, which is one of my favorite peoples of all time. She works for Bloody Disgusting, and she is incredible. One of my favorite peoples. They had an episode with Ty West. So theirs is really fun. My favorite episode from the Boo Crew is definitely Warner Bros. Episode about Horror Made Here, Festival of Frights, because, as I like to say in all my videos, or at least mention in all my videos, I went to Horror Made Here last October. And so when I was first getting into this podcast and I seen that they had an episode on Warner Bros. Horror Made Here, I was like hooked, and just listening to it made me so excited. And I love the Vanessa Decker episode and the Danny Elfman episode as well. So if you're a horror fanatic and you kind of want to delve more into the actors or people or musicians, directors of horror, or just horror topics, this podcast is for you. And honestly, everyone on that podcast I love. So let's get into another one. Now this one's super different than any of the other ones I've talked about, but this is Alexis Haynes' podcast called Recovering from Reality.
I feel safer to be together and to be in the space and to be authentically us.
Well, it's interesting that you chose to sit down with a family therapist. You created an environment that was going to be emotionally...
Now, I don't know if any of you guys have seen the show Pretty Wild. It was on Netflix. It was crazy. It was almost like a spinoff of the Kardashians, but not. And if you guys know anything about like the bling ring and all that stuff, Alexis Haynes was involved with the bling ring. But I love their show Pretty Wild. Me and my family would watch it when it was on Netflix. But basically she has a whole podcast talking about her sobriety, motherhood, recovering from reality. So talking about the reality show and what that was like. She only has 2 episodes, but they get pretty deep. And honestly, when I'm just like in a deeper mood and want something for the soul, if you will, I really like this podcast. So, it's really good. Just know that there is like a trigger warning, I guess, because she does talk a lot about addiction and substance abuse. So if that's something that bothers you, then I definitely wouldn't listen to it maybe, but I love it. So another podcast that I really enjoy is called Horror Movie Podcast, and it's just as you would expect.
Ending up, and you know, it's just kind of hard to stomach as a Lost Boys fan that it will be reincarnated as this teeny bopper whatever, you know?
And they've also announced that the Frog Brothers are going to be the Frog Sisters in this version. So this...
And it's just as you would expect. Me and Zakk mentioned this in our top 10 horror movies of 2018. If you guys haven't seen that, you should definitely go check it out. But I've been listening to horror movie podcasts for quite some time. Basically, I'm pretty sure it's hosted by Jay of the Dead is his, like, name. But basically, they just talk about movies and review movies and series. And it's really fun. Again, if you love horror movie podcasts. Like, it's self-explanatory. Now, this next podcast I'm going to talk to you guys about is my heart, is my joy, is the one that I always go to first, and then if I run out of episodes to listen to, I go on to my other podcasts, and that is Girls Gotta Eat.
Sure, somebody has strung me along for like 5 months, and I've had to have that talk. I just haven't. Like, I've just naturally been in the relationship with the person, but like, if this is just making you miserable, then...
Shout out to Ashley and Raina. I love you. You make my morning every single morning. Basically, it's a dating, sex, advice podcast. it's a dating and sex advice podcast sort of situation. I probably said that really stupid, but you guys get the point. They talk about, they have like a lot of guests on the show just to talk about like different stuff. Again, revolving around sex and dating. They talk about, let's see, what's one of them? They talk about open relationships, dudes in your DMs, how you can make him commit, what turns you on. Like, those are just some of the episodes. They are hilarious. And again, like, I cannot recommend enough people to listen to Girls Gotta Eat. So if you need something funny to watch, listen to, and relatable, like 110% listen to Girls Gotta Eat. I freaking love that podcast so much. So the last podcast I'm going to talk to you guys about is Gaia and Sarah Save the World.
It's easier for people to kind of distinguish that. Yeah.
I just think it depends on how we're using it and to what degree, because I think a lot of young women don't actually know.
Right.
That some people are manipulating the photos and they're thinking, why doesn't my skin look like that?
Mm-hmm.
Why doesn't my body look like that? But something outside of editing is, just please believe me on this, a lot of it is angled.
Now, if you don't know who Gaia is, she is, God, I'm gonna like, I don't mean to devalue what she does, but I guess I just don't know her like official title. I follow her from Instagram, and she talks a lot about feminism, women empowerment, being vegan, all that stuff. If you guys want to go check her out on Instagram, and Sarah as well, I'll link their Instagrams down below. But basically how this all started was, well, at least for me, was about 1.5 years ago. Gaia and Sarah went live on Instagram, so I was like, oh cool, like I'm just gonna watch their live. I wasn't doing anything, and it was all about feminism and answering questions, and just like the way they talk, like they're just so intelligent and passionate about what they're speaking on. And so again, this is honestly one of those deeper podcasts, and if you're in a mood to kind of get more informed and educated on different topics, that's definitely a good podcast for you. Like, they talk about social media, how quick fixes don't exist, and they have a bunch. They're gonna be coming out with a bunch more episodes, but they only have those 2 right now, so 10 out of 10 would recommend. Alright, you guys, so those are my top, how many did we list? Podcasts that I listen to. Again, if you have any good suggestions, go ahead and just leave them in the comments down below. I'm not really too keen on any specific topic for a podcast, so like literally whatever your favorite podcast is, just let me know, and let me know if you like any of the podcasts I listed as well. Also, and of course, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and so that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video, and stay groovy. Bye, guys.
Like, she's very obviously, like, in a fragile mental state at that point. And then Leatherface, in turn, is also losing it and just swinging his chainsaw around, like, so frustrated that he let this person get away. Because, again, like we were saying, like, he had come to the conclusion where he was like, I have to kill everybody. Like, that's the only thing I can do now. And the fact that she got away, like, is very